Welcome back to Leadership Dialogue, the show committed to addressing the toughest challenges facing our nation. I am John Nkamian. Now, today we are focusing on the crisis that has claimed thousands of lives and fractured communities, the herdsman-farmer conflict. Our discussion is centered on the recent issued communique from the two-day National Conference on Securing Nigeria's Future, organized by the Leadership Hub, Justice and Economic Advancement, LJE Nigeria. We are honored to have the driving force behind this conference, the president of LJE Nigeria, Barrister Samuel Monday Meme. Barrister, it's great to have you join us on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, viewers. My pleasure to be here.
Now, it's vital to get this message of peace, justice, and reform out to the nation, especially at a crucial time as we speak. Now, Barrister, your communique proposes an integrated legal framework, but let's first establish the context. We have a respected legal mind, yourself, and of course, looking precisely at the INEC chairman, who is a senior advocate. Many watchers feel that that is a significant move and a difference from what we've seen in the recent past, where we had professors, academia, intellectuals as chair of the Independent National Electoral Commission. But in this case, we have a legal luminary, a senior advocate of Nigeria, who in 2020 wrote a legal brief titled Nigeria's Silent Slaughter, explicitly describing these mass killings as acts of genocide. Yeah. Now, he warned that the government risked repeating the Rwanda and Sudan mistakes. Now, Barrister Mehmet, how does the LJE framework address violence that has been characterized, that is also at this extreme level? Because once killings are tagged genocidal, it's extreme.
Absolutely. Quite clear. We've experienced these killings in Nigeria, and over the years, we've termed these killers with different names. Some of them are tagged to be bandits, some are tagged to be terrorists, and various names that we have identified as being tagged by the government. But no one has really looked deeply to understand that what is the root cause of all of this issue. And I have said, in the course of our research, we've had opportunity of interfacing with the herdsmen, the cattle breeders, and the likes. And we understand that one of the major foundational issues has to do with policy, the policy framework. And what we have proposed is all-encompassive. The policy framework that would indeed, take care of the procedure of rearing cattle in Nigeria. So that is exactly what the policy framework is all about. Now, this simply means that we are running a system where we allow the open grazing pattern of pastoral whatsoever. Now, the national conference that was held on the 30th of September and on the 1st of October identify the root causes of all of this issue, which is the movement of cattle from one place to another. And we now come to realization that in the course of movement of cattle from one place to another, the cattle rearers have to pass through communities. They have to take their cattle through the farmlands. And when they are accosted, what the farmers get is reprisal attack. And in most cases, they are killed in numbers. Some of these killings are even underreported or not reported at all. How do you address all of this issue? You can address all of this issue by strong policy framework and by implementation of laws. All right? So what we are asking for, we now come to understand that the old ways of rearing cattle in Nigeria by moving cattle from one place to another is no longer fashionable. is unsustainable. It can no longer be said to be a way to rear cattle in this country. So this therefore means that the federal government, because the federal government have been silent about this cattle issue, and
Is the silence deliberate, or is it as a lack of capacity on the part of government to change or redirect the trend?
I think it's lack of capacity on the part of the government. Yes, lack of capacity is the right word to use, and it is also deliberate, because we had opportunity. We invited critical stakeholders such as government, representative of government, the federal government, the state government, and we got so many calls from them prior to the conference, and most of the responses was that this issue is a sensitive issue, that they don't want to discuss this issue. So how can you have a system where you have two class of farmers, those rearing cattle and those, the crop farmers, right? And you allow the other farmers to graze on the other one. It therefore means that you are taking side already. So this has nothing to do with clashes. It could have been clash when there is right on both sides. But in this case, the cattle rearers had no right to carry out criminal trespasses against the farmers' land and the rest of them. So that is the basis of all of this issue that you now refer to as genocide. So whether you tell me to be genocide, but I think like what you now refer to as genocide would be that someone is now trying to listen and support the Christian community, like what Donald Trump is trying to do right now. All right. So it is not enough for government to say, no, it's only Christians that are being killed. Let those, and when you look at the responses, you understand that so many Muslims community are now coming out to speak, responding to say, no, it's not only Christians that are being killed. But who are those killing who? So there must be a legal framework to address this issue so that we will understand where other killers are coming from.
Now, I'm happy you've emphasized and continue to harp on the phrase legal framework, policy framework. It tends to suggest that there is some lacuna with regards to the Constitution when it comes to issues of this manner. So, how does LJE's communicate tackle that constitutional failure, as it were, where that lacuna seems to exist as far as the grand norm is concerned in the Constitution?
Yeah, the Constitution is a parent law of the country upon which other laws can emanate from, right? Now, what the government needs to do, we have identified all of those things. There is a need for the government to enact laws that has to do with this issue of open grazing or cattle rearing in Nigeria. Many states have summoned courage, but with less effective control over the implementation of these laws. Now, the federal government must come forward with genuine intention to lead by example. And that is where we're having this challenge, right? There are so many states, Bayelsa State, Delta State, Edo states, Benue states, so many other states in Nigeria has enacted anti-open grazing laws.
Yes.
Now, it could be much easier if we have a federal government who could take this lead by coming up to say there should be restriction of movement of cattle in Nigeria. What this simply means is that you now recognize that cattle rearers are business owners. The regular farmers are business owners. So therefore, for cattle rearers, because they have been clamored for ranching, they have been clamored for Ruga and the rest of them. Now, we have come to understand again that the federal government had not been able to develop the capacity to establish ranches. And some of the effort they have made in the past was not really well accepted by various states. This is because federal government tend to be sentimental in this issue by trying to allocate certain portion of land to cattle rearers. And this was not well received by states and communities. So what this simply means is that for a cattle rearer or cattle owners who is a private business owner,
yes,
ought to provide an environment for him or her to rear their cattle. So the framework we are now proposing now require that as a cattle owner or group of cattle owners, they can come together, acquire land, to keep their cattle, then acquire land also for commercial purpose, and also grow grass to feed their cattle. Now, the state government, the local government also have critical roles to play. One, they must also develop the communities, construct roads to the areas where these establishments should be made, right? Now, it's also going to grow the economy base of these various communities.
At the micro level.
At the micro level. The local government and the state level are also expected to establish security framework within their locality to implement. Because you see what happened in the case of Benue State. The former Benue State governor was very brutal in terms of trying to implement anti-open grazing laws. But what he failed to do was to establish security architecture being manned by the local authority to protect the lives, to act more like a synergy between the local community and the conventional security agencies, to serve as information gathering and also to protect the local community. We understand that some of these communities had little or no presence of our conventional security agencies. So the local government agency, the state government must, as a matter of this policy framework, required to establish security network between the state government and the local government level. In fact, it was so clear to the essence that it has to be, they have to recruit these people from the various communities and based on local wards accordingly. So this will now serve more to protect the people and to protect against reprisal attack. Because what you now hear more about genocide is most of them are carried out by these earthmen, whether you call it Fulani herdsmen or other people from other tribe. But the bottom line is that there is this battle to claim the bush areas, all right? And the bush areas is where you carry out your farm work, right? So this issue must be addressed in such a way that must accommodate all these various critical stakeholders for them to have peace at that various community level.
Let me go back to something you said earlier when you talked about the government, federal government. You emphasized federal government being sentimental. Well, I'm not holding brief for the federal government, but this administration will tell you they created the Ministry of Livestock and Animal Horse Boundary. Now, isn't that a key step to bridging that gap? At the federal level, there's a ministry that is supposed to now take responsibility of dealing with the various factors and issues as it relates to the herdsmen-farmers clash. Hasn't the government done enough in that step?
No, government has not done anything. What the government did was, the president simply did was to establish a ministry, appoint political persons to compensate them for elections. I can tell you why. If you had the privilege, we had the opportunity, we invited the Minister of Livestock. And if you go to the Ministry of Livestock, even the Ministry of Agriculture, nothing much is happening apart from payment of salaries to the civil servant and the rest of them. You find out what the Ministry of Agriculture is doing in this country. Absolutely zero. Now, under the watch of the two ministries, of Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Livestock, you can barely see any achievements. Because what we expected when Ministry of Livestock was established, what we expected was probably this Ministry of Livestock could address the issue that would somehow favor those that are into livestock breeding and the rest of them. The Minister of Agriculture will take care of the other aspect. But that is not the case. Nothing much is happening in these two ministries. I can tell you. Nothing much. If you have facts, you can present the fact or whatever they have done. Nothing has been done by these two ministries because under their watch, you still see cattle rearers moving their cattle from one place to another, destroying livelihoods, destroying farmland. And the implication is very daring. It therefore means that over time, you are going to phase out farmers. And what the implication of all of this thing is that you are going to have food insecurity. You must have seen high rates and high cost of food items in this country. That is because since over time, particularly since the former president Buhari came on board,
Muhammadu Buhari.
Yes, in 2015, you've had more farmers leaving the business of farming and running for their safety. So at the end of the day, you find only very few people that had the courage to still go and plant. Many people are not even going into that area. So this is going to affect it's going to affect the issue of food security. It's going to affect the issue of farming. It's also going to affect the issue of security of lives and properties. Those who would have naturally go into farming cannot go into farming for fear, because you can arrest header that you eventually find your farm if you had the courage to even arrest. Sometimes they go through your farmland in the evening time and destroy your crops. So if you plant your crops and you come back the following day, your crops have been destroyed by the herders, what would you do? Who are you going to hold accountable? No one. So at the end of the day, you may have to leave that business and go for other things entirely.
All right. Now, you recommended state model new laws after existing ones, including the Benue Anti-Open Grazing Law of 2017.
Yes.
Why the emphasis on state level legislation? One would expect that it should be a bit more expansive, considering the volume of damage that has been done, and of course the after effect of farmer headers clashes.
Yeah, what we recommended, because this is a local problem, and local problem must be addressed through the local communities and all of those things. Now, if you look at some of the killings going on in this country, particularly those ones being perpetrated by the herders, they move around. They move around with weapons under the guise that sometimes
they're protecting their
herd, and sometimes they also encounter cattle wrestlers and the rest of them. So, but the farmers don't have the weapons to protect themselves. So what you need to do is to set up a security architecture, equip them to protect the vulnerables in the community, and under strict supervision by the Conventional Security Agency, the NSCDC, the Nigerian Police Force, and the DSS alike. All right? Now, for this federal government has a role to play. Federal government has been hiding from all of this issue. I believe this is because the former president was a little bit biased in all of this, because the crisis...
Because he was a herder himself.
So the crisis grew more under his administration, under his watch. Now, this current administration has not taken any critical step in this direction, because we've had opportunity of interfacing with some of the officials of this government when we invited them for this conference, for them to also come and tell us what they have done. They shy away from it. But some of them said is a sensitive area. Issue, sensitive area, and they don't want to offend people and the rest. But how long shall we continue to? So what this simply means is that the federal government has a role to play. They must also come by way of their legislation. But in terms of implementation can only be effected through the local community under the supervision of the state government. So it's going to be a synergy. Why we tag the state government and the local government is because there's a need for them to recruit and employ locals to protect the local communities. And there is also another side of huge responsibility on the side of government, which has to do with expanding the communities, developing the communities. There must be accessible roads, because if we are saying there should be a restriction of movement of cattle in Nigeria, it therefore means that what we are advocating full time is that cattle should not be seen moving around in this country at all. If you are moving cattle, you must move your cattle through the vehicle movement, right? So if you have your cattle ranch somewhere, it therefore means that there must be accessible road to the areas where you have this cattle. And who have to provide the road is the government. So all of these things means that the communities, the bushes, and all of those things must expand,
must have
the scope,
access
points, access road, develop this road so that people can have access to this area. For those who want to go into... So, and let me not forget to say that the issue of cattle rearing shouldn't be left in the hands of a particular tribe. So if the law is so very clear and modus of operandi is clear, you and I, anyone can pick up this area of business and go into the business. And it's also going to create a lot of employment, because it therefore means that locals can even farm and have access to grow grasses or whatever other feed that will be for the purpose of consumption by these cattle. So it's going to be a win-win situation for the cattle rearers and the cattle herders, who are crying that most time their cattle are being restored. So there will be peace for them.
At least they are in a contained, secured environment.
So I do not know why we think that the only way we can breed cattle is to feed them for free. You can't breed, you can't go into your business and you think you don't want to spend money to feed your cattle. No. There are different kind of poultries that we have in this country. So if you have your cattle, you keep your cattle somewhere, you must be able to sort for their food. At the end of the day, you put your cost together and place a price tag on your cattle. So it's not compulsory that you must take your cattle from one point to another, thereby destroying other people's livelihood. And this is the genesis of all of this crisis you have seen in this country.
Okay, now let's delve into your suggested security network. Now, you propose a multi-tier structure involving community security units, which you call CSUs,
Yes.
Operating under community policing committees, the CPC,
Yes.
And at the state, local government, and ward levels. Now, what exactly will these CSUs do? Because now, under the current administration, we have forest guards, we have mining guards, and now you're suggesting CSUs. Won't there be conflict of interest? Because we've seen policies that tend to suggest that while the police are doing policing, when it comes to securing other interland related issues, the NCDSC, Civil Defense Corps, is giving that assignment. And now we have forest guards who are also seem to be an arm of the Civil Defense Corps. So how do we differentiate, or how do we do it in such a way that there won't be conflicts of interest? Because once it comes to the subject of community policing, anything that has to do with policing at that local level, there's a lot of apprehension.
Yes, the CSUs, community security units. All right. Now, these are to be established by the various state governments in conjunction with the local governments. Now, what you have as the forest guides, for me, they are not doing anything. We don't know their numbers, and they are unable to cover up. Now, the CSUs are to operate under the supervision of the local government. Their primary responsibility is to enforce anti-open grazing laws and to protect farmlands, at least for the period of for the starting period. Because you saw what happened in Benue. I keep repeating what happened in Benue because it's one lesson that we must learn from. When you try to implement a law that some persons feel that this law is targeted against them, like in this case of the S-men, some of them feel like, oh, you want to stop us from rearing our cattle. But that is not the truth. Now, there is no clear understanding. If you have gone through the laws there's no clear understanding in terms of who to implement these laws. Any law that does not have implementation mechanism is not an effective law. There must be implementation mechanism, and that is what these CSUs have come to tackle. Now, they are more like community policing based, all right, set up by the state government, not to operate in the rural, in the urban area, but rather to operate in the rural area. And they are going to be selected among the communities and under strict supervision by the security agencies the NSCDC, the police, and the DSS and the like. Now, and their method of recruitment, as we suggested, would be based on the areas where there are so many youths
where they are situated.
Where they are situated. So they understand the environment. What you saw in Benue as a result of the reprisal attack was lack of implementation mechanism, because there are some of these communities that have very low number of indigents there. So, and at night they must go to sleep. So you must have people that can as well protect the environment for the period of takeoff of this new system. So that if there are people who want to come in to attack communities, they would be stopped by this local community system. And this local community system must be set up by the state government, not by the various, like what we see.
Yeah.
So
various security formations.
So, and their system of operation must be embedded and must be captured in the anti-open grazing laws being passed or being established by the various state governments. All right. Now, what the federal government needs to do is to lend voice, particularly through the Land Use Act, because the current Land Use Act we have currently, of course, actually give the power of ownership of land to the states. To the states.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Okay.
To the states. So it therefore means that all part of this country belongs to any of the state government. So there is no free land in Nigeria. There is no free land to say because this part of this country had not been taken over or there is no development going on there. It therefore means that it's a free land, so any person can go into this area and keep their cattle there and camp there. No. All right. So the CSUs will now act more to protect the communities, and they will be under the payroll of the state governments in conjunction with the local governments.
Now, I'm happy you mentioned payroll because it sounds like a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Yes, we will say that there is local government autonomy and billions of naira is going to the local, but there are two things here. We know that despite the fact that they say there is local government autonomy, the local governments are not autonomous because they are still under the control of the state governments. And the flip side of what you're suggesting is professionalism, especially when you say those who will make up the CSUs will be locals, embedded in those rural areas. So how do you prevent these CSUs from becoming another layer of non-state actors contributing to the violence?
No, their terms. If you go through the communique, you will understand their terms. All right, they have clear terms of operation.
Okay,
and they are going to be strictly monitored by the civil society organizations and the conventional security agencies, which is the police and the NSCDC and the DSS and the rest. Then the civil society will also monitor clearly what they are doing, and they will get response from the community. So when they start acting on travails, the community would definitely respond and report back to the coordinating, either the local government, or the state government, or the conventional security, or the civil society, so that you will not have an experience where people will now abuse the powers given to them. But the one thing that is very paramount is that we shouldn't be afraid of what is coming in terms of setting up this structure. Because not having this structure in place is even more dangerous than having them and be scared whether they're going to abuse their powers.
But you can't blame Nigerians for being skeptical. We have various states with various security outfits. In southwest Nigeria, you have Amotekun. In southeast, you have ESN and Ebube Adugu and the rest of them. But they have not really delivered the kind of results that residents and indigents of those political zones have expected.
No, in the case of the ESM is not a legally established authority. It was actually established by some persons who feel that there is a need for them to, because that is the problem we are having in Nigeria. When the government fails to do what is needed to be done, you find out that people want to take laws into their hands. That was what you see in the case of the ESN. In the case of the Ameteko was established by way of law. And when you look at the Amete Code law, you understand that it actually provides some level of solution, but it's that Amete Code is still finding it difficult for full implementation. And there is a need for us to incorporate this particular legal framework that tends to bring in method of recruitment.
Yes.
Because these guys are well sophisticated. I don't know the number of recruited members in Ametoko in East or the Southwest states, but I know for sure that these numbers are still far below what is expected to implement such a sensitive issue that has to do with the S-men farmers issue.
Yeah.
And yet, in the Southwest, we can still find cattle moving from one place to another. So there is no clear-cut restriction of movement of cattle in Nigeria that tends to address this issue. So what this proposal is trying to address or come up with is to institutionalize this security architecture in all states to prevent reprisal attack and to ensure that really, and they will patrol on the bushes and ensure that farmers are carrying out their duties and their businesses. Then the elders as well, they are also carrying out their businesses right in different areas in the bush. So, and they also ensure that arrests can be made when there is a breach of law and order. But if you look at what has gone on in this country, and when you look at it, you can hardly find any farmer who is wrong. Interestingly, because before you acquire a land to plant your crops, is it that the land belongs to you or you rent the land and plant your crops? But in the case of the elders, they don't care. They don't know who owns the land. They just take their cattle from one place to another and graze on people's land. And this is causing untold hardship on those who naturally want to remain in farm business.
All right, we're fast out of time, but let's talk about enforcement, Barrister. Professor Amotekun highlighted that one group, the Fulani headsmen, had not been officially recognized as terrorists, despite being accused of orchestrating massacres. This lack of designation creates a justice gap. How does LJE's framework close that gap within a terrorism designation?
Well, I think so far so good. There is no clear law that tends to stop these guys from killing. Yes, we know that the law is very clear in terms of killing, taking the life of another. But when it comes to the movement of cattle, because it is in course of moving their cattle that they engage in killing. And that was why Professor George Ametoko referred them to as terrorists. Right? But I know that if we have a clear law, comprehensive law, detailing the restriction of movement of cattle and how cattle raiders can carry out their business, then upon that, we can now say, if there is a breach on the side of the herders, you cannot refer them to as terrorists. All right? Because if you are referring them to as terrorists and nothing is being done, they are still having the free will. Now, we are not even concerned about those who are moving their cattle about on the streets here, like here in Abuja. We are more concerned. If you look at the way they even move their cattle on the street of Abuja, you definitely imagine there are so many farmland along the road. How can you control your cattle? Because sometimes you see heads of cattle about like 50 with just two persons, controlling them. And sometimes you find them at the back, some other time you find them at the front. So what happened when the one at the front is consuming another person's cattle, crops? So it's about justice. It's about justice. And I'm a witness to the violent nature of these herders. I'm a witness to some of the activities. When you accuse them or try to stop them, if there is no one there, they can kill. So you must stop them by making laws that will ensure and criminalize the movement. Once you criminalize the movement of cattle, like I said, it's a win-win situation but food for the herders,
And for the farmers.
for the farmers, and for the government, and for the communities as well. If you restrict the movements and you compare them, some will tell you, how are they going to feed their cattle? So what about those who are into poultry, chicken poultry, and the rest of them? What about those who, there are so many people who are into business. How are they feeding their livestock? So there must be a way to, to get the feeds and the food and how you can feed your cattle. Then place a price tag. If at the end of the day, one cattle worth 5 million, then place it. After all, now people are purchasing cattle for 1 point something million and above. And you are paying the herders 1.3, 1.4 million to purchase one cattle.
One cattle.
And they never paid a dime to feed the cattle. Because they feed their cattle from the cradle to the end, to the point they sell, without spending any money, apart from the people they pay to take this cattle from one point to another. So the money you will spend to pay the herders to take the cattle from one point to another, you spend the money to provide food for the cattle.
And keep them in one spot. Well, final thoughts, Barrister. Considering Professor Amokpiton's warning of genocide, what is the core message LJE Nigeria is sending to the federal government today?
The message we are sending to the federal government is for the federal government to consider a recommendation made by the National Conference of 30th of September and 1st of October 2025 to consider this recommendation and take proactive measure to address this issue. Federal government must come by way of law. Federal government must take the lead. Federal government must show leadership capacity to say, we have concern for the farmers, and there is a need for us to protect the farmers and protect the farmlands. There is no two ways to protect the farmers and the farmland and the community without restricting the movement of cattle in Nigeria.
Well, Barrister Samuel Monday Momo, founder and president of the Leadership Hub, Justice and Economic Advancement, LJE Nigeria. Thank you for this comprehensive and vital dialogue. We really appreciate you could make our time to be on the show.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
Now, the communique is a challenge and a roadmap. Professor Amokpiton's brief is a stark reminder of the stakes. The government now has a detailed, integrated framework to move the nation from potential genocide towards justice and lasting peace. Thank you for joining us on Leadership Dialogue. We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, keep sharing the stream.